this is a perfect type of not question. So sometimes on multiple choice questions, I'll say, which of these is not a reason why China stopped exploring? So you have to identify which reason doesn't belong. So whenever I give you a list, it's good to try and remember the items from that list. Someone asked about Sejong. Let's see. Young-Yoon, I have to give you the honor. Who is King Sejong?
He made the Korean alphabet.
Right, he's the great Korean king who made the Korean alphabet. And we talked about that. That's important because it showed how Koreans, even though Korea was influenced by China, borrowed Chinese items of Chinese culture and civilization, Korea was still an independent country that had its own culture. And Young-Yoon's from Korea, so that's why I had to. King Sejong's awesome, so I had to include him. Remember, I'm a Koreanist. I focus on Korea in my research. So that answers that question. That brings us to the Muslim empires. So let's see. Where did my... Oh, there's the eraser. Is that an eraser? Okay, here's the eraser. So I had this question. How do the three Islamic civilizations we study how do they treat non-Muslims differently? I use that as an example of how they're different. All right, one thing I want people to understand was that all Muslims aren't the same, and that Islam is different depending on the historical context. So we have this question, how do the three Islamic civilizations we study treat non-Muslims differently? So the Ottomans, tolerant or intolerant? Tolerant, yeah. And I'll say mostly. Remember, they had janissaries, which, forcing people to convert isn't really that tolerant, but for the most part, they were tolerant, right? What was the best example of that tolerance? What did they do with Christians and Jews?
They just let them pay attention.
Yeah, you pay the tax. If you are not a Muslim, you pay the tax, and you can stay not being a Muslim. You can pay the tax, you still can be a Christian, you can still be a Jew, unless your children are kidnapped from you and made into janissaries. And what kind of Islam do they follow? Sunni. That brings us then, let's go with the Safavid. Tolerant or intolerant?
Intolerant.
Right, intolerant. And what are they? What kind of Muslims? Shia. Remember, they won't even tolerate other Muslims. They want to make even Sunni Muslims. They want to try and force to convert to Shia Islam. And of course, Christians they also try and force to convert as well. So this is the most intolerant. The Mughals are kind of different. People, a student emailed me the question whether they were Sunni or Shia. I answered they're Sunni-ish. They're more Sunni than Shia, but they're kind of their own thing. And the key thing with the Mughals that makes them a little different is sometimes they're really tolerant. Right? What was the best example of them being really tolerant? What's something that Akbar did?
Got all of them together.
Right, he would bring everyone together, right? He actually tried to form his own religion. That's one thing.
The one that stopped the burning of the wives?
That was Jahangir. But no, that's a good point. That's close, because he followed his policy similar to Akbar. He tolerated Hindus, and did Hindus have to pay the tax?
He got rid of the tax.
Yeah. It was interesting, even though Hindus were not technically people of the book, they didn't have to pay the tax under Akbar. Or under Akbar, he said, so he was really tolerant, right? He says Hindus, remember he had the right to tell them convert or die, according to the Quran, but he didn't do that. Instead he said, well, we'll tolerate you, and on top of that, we won't even make you pay that tax. So for the Mughals, Akbar was the most tolerant. Under the Mughals, though, who was the least tolerant? Aurangzeb, yeah.
That guy.
On the other side, the Mughals, sometimes you had people who were not very tolerant. One of those was this guy, Aurangzeb. Remember, he starts to make Hindus pay the tax. And then that helps put an end to the Mughals as a power. Right, so it was not a good strategy. So any questions on that? Next question, how did women wield power in the Ottoman Empire? That was another video question. Call what's... Right. Yeah, a lot of times if they were the mother of a sultan or gave a sultan an heir, they exercised power through their men. Right? We can't say that these women were independent, and we can't say that they exercised power on their own, but through their relationships with men, particularly if they were the mother or wife of a sultan, they could have some power through the men. Someone had their hand up. I'm sorry, Chris.
The harem, did that play?
Right, it's in the harem,
Okay.
right? That's the place where they're supposed to be. Yeah. So that's, like I say, that's a video question. Usually when I show a video, it's tied to a question, so that's why it's important to listen to those. Okay, why was the fall of Constantinople important for the Ottoman Empire, for the Christian West? This is one slide that helps us answer that question, right? Remember, there are all these Greek scholars who are going to flee from Constantinople once the Ottoman Muslims take it. Remember, Constantinople was originally a Christian city. They're going to flee to Europe, and they're going to teach Europeans how to read Greek, and that will help lead to the Reformation and the Renaissance, help Europeans to go back to the sources of the Bible. It will also allow Muslims to have the trade here. They'll be able to control the trade more here. And that's going to spur these Europeans over here to go explore. Right? When the Muslims take Constantinople, they start getting dominance over trade. These Europeans say, let's go explore. Let's figure out how to get to Asia on our own so we don't have to deal with these guys. And then they go out exploring. This is also going to allow the Ottoman Empire to expand further, both this way and down here. So it's going to set the stage for even greater Ottoman expansion. So this is really a big deal. Also, it's at this point that the Ottoman Empire will declare that it's the Caliph. Right? Remember, Caliph is a successor to Muhammad. At this point, they'll say, after they win this great victory over Constantinople, they will say, we, the Ottomans, are the Caliphs. So any questions there? Why didn't science develop within the Ottoman Empire? Okay, this is one where we have stuff all kind of come together. This is another video question. What's this guy famous for? Taqiyuddin. Astronomer, right. So he was a famous astronomer. Why? So Ottoman Empire has some science. Why doesn't he end up being like Galileo or someone who helped start a scientific revolution? What happens to him? Yeah, he made a bad prediction. There was a comet coming. He predicted it. He said this will mean a great victory. It didn't. They lost. So that's, and they were wrong. So the religious authorities used this as an excuse to destroy his observatory. And this is key. Sometimes Islam was friendly to science. And if you were in my class in History 121, we talked about examples of when Islam was friendly to science. But in this period, what happens is Muslims who think science is bad, Muslims who see science as an enemy to faith, they come into power. And they're going to try and get rid of Taqiyuddin and these other astronomers. And they're actually going to cut the Ottoman Empire off from contact with Europe and European scientific ideas. So they're going to cut themselves off from the source of scientific knowledge. They also, remember, they also don't like printing. Right? They don't like you to print books. And of course, you can't have science without the free flow of information. This next question goes to what Charles had kind of brought up. This guy, Jahangir, his policy towards Sati. And recall, how would you summarize his policy towards Sati? What did he as the emperor of the Mughals do about Sati?
If you were a mother or pressured, you couldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. He put restrictions. He said if it's a mother with children, you can't have a Sati. And if you don't remember, Sati, remember, is widow burning. If you're a mother with children, you can't kill yourself. Or if you're pressured, if you're forced to commit Sati, that's illegal. So he restricted Sati. right? He restricted it because one reason, or one of the chief reasons, was because it offended him. As a pious Muslim, he was disturbed by this act that he saw as suicide. Right? This is bad, this is suicide. But why didn't he just ban it?
He was tolerant.
Yeah, he had to be tolerant towards Hindu practices. He couldn't just ban it completely. If he was intolerant towards Hindu practices, he may have been overthrown. That would lead to social disorder. And you could see that in that edict we looked at where he said, I don't care what people say, I'm going to restrict it for these matters, meaning that people didn't like him restricting it. And he was worried if he pushed it too far, he could be overthrown, and that would be the end of the Mughals. Okay, no one had any questions about that? Yes.
I had a question.
Sure.
Number 4, that's the one I sent you a question about.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it somehow. So, why was bureaucracy so important for the Ottomans? Remember, we often think of bureaucracy as a bad thing, but bureaucracy is actually a good thing because it organizes things. Remember, the Ottomans started off as raiders. Right? The Ottomans just initially started off as people who would come in, attack a village, take stuff, and then run away. That's about the most they could organize. If you want to take over a place and keep that place and maintain an army, you need bureaucracy, right? You need people to organize and to administer. You need people to set taxes. You need people to collect those taxes. You need people to get ammunition, to get food, to give justice, to support the army, and so forth. So by adopting bureaucracy, the Ottomans were able to build large armies that they could use to conquer other people and then control that territory that they conquered. You can build up a large army because you're organized and you can extract resources. You can go conquer a new territory. You can administer that territory, get even more resources, and do it again. You just keep doing it and doing it and doing it, and that's why they got so big. Yes,
How they
Charles?
failed though, because they got too big.
Exactly. One reason they decline, though, is they get too big, and they're not able then to get the resources that those places had, and it eventually just kind of crumbles apart. But yeah, and that's part of the, you're right, that's part of the problem of pre-modern societies. They don't have the internet. They don't have airplanes, so it's very slow to communicate. Does that answer your question, Chris? Okay. Yeah, no problem. Sorry, I missed that. Okay, I don't know if you can quite make these out, but starting with number 2, why did people engage in slavery and the slave trade? Easy way to remember that. One answer begins with an M. Money, yeah, you could make a lot of money being engaged in the slave trade. And I gave 2 examples of that. One was that if you owned a plantation, you got 100% return on your investment every year. I mean, you can't do that legally now. There's no way you can find that kind of investment. And also, even if you were involved in the triangular trade, the Atlantic system, that also, you made money that way. And part of that was connected to slavery, either buying or selling African slaves or buying and selling sugar, which was harvested by African slaves. Why were people so cruel to slaves? Why did you, right, to control them, right? You have to dehumanize them, you have to intimidate them. And how did slaves resist that cruelty? And this is connected to that video. Right, their music, their communities, right, asserting their humanity. How did slavery affect Africa and Africans? I'm not going to ask you the exact numbers, but one thing I want to emphasize, it had a huge effect. Right, we talked about, you had about...
One side of men, one side of women.
Right, exactly. One thing was, remember, most of the people from West Africa were being taken, most of the slaves from West Africa were going to the Americas where they